To start with something a bit provocative, I think that speaking about the coming war, Giulietto Chiesa is exactly right. I think this is something we have to take very seriously, and don't forget, in a certain sense, the war is already going on. And it's not only Donbass, it's also what's happening around Transnistria, because, okay, they are not shooting, but the blockade is already taking place, and it is also, in a certain sense, an act of war. But let's look at the economy and the economics of the current crisis. And the first thing which I want to stress, which I mentioned yesterday during the debate and when I made a few comments, I think the important thing to understand about the current situation is that neoliberalism is at the same time decomposing and expanding. It's exactly the irony of the current situation. And this logic of decomposition is not contradicting its expansion, but on the contrary, it is actually pushing its expansion forward, because given the inner crisis of the system, given the lack of resources to keep it sustainable, and given the decomposition of the social fabric of societies which were most strongly affected by neoliberal reforms or transformations, whatever you call it, it is becoming extremely important for the ruling elites to take over new resources and new territories in any direct or indirect sense of the word. And that explains both what's happening in Greece and what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening with and around Russia. Because the second point I want to make is absolutely essential. We must understand that the crisis in Greece and the war in Ukraine, which are seen often as two totally different and separate events, in reality are not separate. These are two sides of the same process. These two sides of the same crisis, the two manifestations of the same development. And of course, one of the important aspects of the current dominant propaganda of the elites is exactly to prevent people seeing that interconnection, especially prevent people in the West seeing that interconnection. And of course, then you come to the famous blame Russia argument, that Russia is responsible for what is happening in Ukraine because of Russian imperialism, because of Russian expansionism, because Russia always wants to take over the territories of its neighbors, and so on and so on. Well, I don't agree with this argument, but imagine even that we agree with it, even if we take it for seriously, even if we accept this kind of argument, still, it doesn't respond to the main question. Even if it is so, why is it happening right now? If it is some kind of eternal expansionism of Russians, why is it happening now, simultaneously with the crisis in Greece, with the economic crisis which is developing in Europe and around the world? And the answer is that, of course, in reality, it is very much the result of the expansionist strategies of the EU towards the East, towards Ukraine and Moldova and other post-Soviet republics. The expansionist strategy, which itself is not a result of some kind of expansionism or imperialism of the West, taken in the same kind of metaphysical way. It's not that the West is not expansionist, but it explains nothing. The very fact that the West was and is expansionist also doesn't explain much. What is important is that EU project for Ukraine and for Russia is emerging as the result of the inner crisis of the EU project itself. So the very danger of decomposition of the European Union, of course the decomposition which is not happening right now, but which is becoming for the first time since its creation a real prospect, is making them act aggressively and in a very expansionist way. And here is also a very important aspect, which I think maybe was mentioned by Glaziev, but not by anyone else during this conference. It's an appearance of a potentially alternative integration project. The so-called customs union, or also sometimes it's called, now it's already renamed into Eurasian Economic Union, which, to be honest, is in no way an alternative project right now, but potentially can develop into an alternative project. So, so far, again, what I'm saying is that the customs union in Eurasia, the Eurasian integration project, is not presenting a viable alternative to neoliberalism just because it's not a viable project so far. It's just an attempt to formulate, to develop a project. Just the first steps are made, and there are inner contradictions within Russian society and other societies involved, which also prevent this project to develop into anything more substantial. However, I think it's already enough to make quite a lot of people in Brussels worried, just by the very fact that something is happening there in the East. And you know, Herbert Marcuse, already in the 1970s, had a term, preventive counter-revolution. That sometimes counter-revolution, according to Marcuse, starts before the actual revolution. So that's quite natural, given the fact that elites are not stupid, and then they can calculate, they can analyze, and they can understand where the dangers are coming. But here I think it's also, in a certain sense, a similar logic, because it's a preventive attempt to destroy the very space where some alternative integration project can emerge before this integration project is coming close to anything serious. So in that sense, it's some kind of preventive counter-reformist project. I mean, on the side of the West. It's on the side of the European Union. It's a preventive strategy to not only to integrate places like Ukraine and Moldova into EU sphere of influence, because it's not that much real integration happening or even planned, but it's very much like to make the other side of Europe disintegrate. So it's not about integrating Ukraine into Europe, into Western Europe, into the European community, but it's about cutting it away from the potential partners of Eurasian integration. So that is exactly why the project is also very destructive, because it's not offering much to the Ukrainian people. It's not about making Ukrainian people live like Germans or French or whatever. So that is going to really undermine the balance of forces in Eastern Europe. And on the one hand, we must understand that this development is becoming a general European problem, a general European phenomenon, because that is the next frontier of neoliberalism. And in a certain sense, it's the last battle of neoliberal project in Europe. If they lose that battle, that will be most probably the end of neoliberal project in Europe, because there will be no other options for it to sustain itself. So in that sense, it's very interconnected. It's very much the Greek crisis, which is yet another frontier, also in a certain sense, in the financial terms, and the geopolitical frontier in Ukraine and Russia, which is the other frontier. These are the last frontiers and the last battles. So if these battles are lost for the neoliberal project, it will be in one way or another reversed. And that's something they understand, and that's why they're so angry. That's why we have this propaganda against Greece, and that's why we have this propaganda against Russia. In both ways, in both cases, very nasty, going beyond anything you have in peacetime. But let's now speak about Russia itself. You see, the problem with Russian society is that it is a sleeping society. I quote a colleague and friend of mine, Anna Ochkina, a sociologist from Penza, who did a lot of research in provincial Russian, and this image of a sleeping society, I think it's very, very important, very telling to understand what's happening in Russia. And for example, Giulietto Chiesa mentioned 80% popularity of Putin as a current phenomena in Russian society. But the problem is that it doesn't make any difference. It is of no importance. Because as long as these 80% of the population are not involved in any decision-making or in any political process whatsoever, it doesn't matter whether there is an 80% popularity or 5% popularity, it's no difference. It makes no difference. No, they play no role. The real importance is what the elites think. And here we're coming to a very serious problem. Because if we have this phenomenon of 80% popularity of Putin among the people, which is true, by the way, it's not any kind of exaggeration, it's true. It doesn't reflect any politics. It just reflects the fact that Russians take Putin for granted as the head of Russia. No, it's not even emotional. No, no. It is just like, okay, you know, we have very cold climate in Russia. We have Kremlin and the Red Square in Moscow. We have Putin as the president of Russia. We have, I don't know, moon in the sky. That's all objective phenomena, like weather, like climate. Putin is just part of the landscape, nothing more, no more, no less. It's just part of the landscape in Russia, period. It's like asking people in Russia whether you like Putin or not. It's like saying them, well, are you Russians? Yes, we are. So do you like Putin? Well, Putin is just, well, the element of Russian landscape. If you like our landscape, we have to have Putin there. And that's how it is in the brains of majority of Russian people. So, it's not about Putin being so popular. It's just that people do not even imagine any country without Putin. If Putin disappears tomorrow, of course, they will rethink that within minutes. But as long as it is there, and as he is there, that's how it is. But it's not the way elites think. And given the fact that Russian elites are totally westernized, totally oriented towards their Western partners, given the fact that Russian elites have all their families abroad in the West, have their money abroad in the West, have their property abroad in the West, mostly in Britain and in the United States, in Switzerland, it's not the kind of elite which is going to resist Western pressure strongly. The problem is that they are forced to fight even against their own will. They don't want to fight against the West. It's the last thing they want to do. The problem is that the West is attacking them. And again, they would rather prefer to make a deal if there is any chance to make a deal with the West. But again, the other side is not going to take prisoners. They're ready to surrender. The other side is not giving them a chance to surrender properly. That's what is happening. And this elite is confused, frightened, and unable to win, by definition. These people will never win, they will never allow their own country to win, and they will never wake up their society to win, because without waking up the society, there will be no victory. So they will be defeated. As long as we have that elite, as long as we have these people in power, as long as we have this structure of interests on the top of Russian society, we are going to lose. If we are not losing so far, it's partly because the West made so many stupid mistakes that it makes the situation even pathetic sometimes. That they have so great misunderstanding of economic, social, cultural, political conditions in Eastern Europe that even given their strength, they cannot and they do not use these strengths. However, the situation is quite dramatic, and it's not about politics. It's a life and death issue, both for Greece and for Russia. Because within this project, it's not only about Ukraine facing a major disaster, because it is facing a major disaster. It's not about its relations to Russia. It's also about, for example, a massive neoliberal restructuring of Ukrainian economy, which leads to social conditions of the majority of people being completely destroyed. The destruction of what remains of the welfare state, the destruction of public infrastructure, and so on and so on. So, but it's also the life and death thing for Russia, because there is no rule for Russia to play in this new liberal, post-neoliberal world with this in this process. We are going to disappear as a country, as a society, if this process continues. There is no good solution. There is no happy ending within this scenario. So this scenario has to be stopped. And finally, because I've got this note, all of a sudden you became very tough. Well, what about the conclusion? Well, Russian elites can and most probably will be defeated, but I personally think, and most of my competitors, I think, share that view, that Russia cannot and will not be defeated. And you see, we're a sleeping society which can be compared to a sleeping beauty. And so far, it's not about kissing. I don't want to be more rude. But what the West is doing, that will lead to Russian society waking up. And it will happen very, very soon, because I'm sure that the events are speeding up, also partly because Russian leadership is trying to make a deal with the United States before the new president comes in. So it means that development of things is speeding up very, very fast. So the things will start changing already within this year and probably next year. And the final thing is that, speaking about Russian elites, what they do and how they behave reminds me of Neville Chamberlain and his reaction to Nazi aggression in Central Europe, when Churchill reacted to the famous policy of pacifying the aggressor, the compromise policy of Chamberlain, saying he offered us a choice between shame and war, and we have chosen shame and we've got war. So that means that if Russian ruling elites are behaving the way they're behaving now, we are going to have most probably both shame and war, which doesn't mean that we're going to lose this war. We're going to win it in the long run. But unfortunately, I think we have to pass through some kind of Russian Dunkirk. But don't forget, that's not the end of the story. And even if we get defeated at some point, it doesn't mean that Russian society is going to be defeated and destroyed. I think it will recover, and we'll have lots of changes. But the important thing is that we cannot win unless we change our own society socially, politically, economically. This is the essential condition. And that's why I absolutely agree that in a certain sense, some kind of pan-European revolution is beginning or taking place already. And without Russia, it will not happen, but Russia will be part of it. Thank you.